Before you hand over the keys with host Anne-Marie Hayes, this is episode 7. Do you know who they're riding with? With Candace Lightner. If you're still listening to this podcast, you already get that the investment you put into teaching your teens to drive, coaching them, assisting them is money well spent because they're going to be driving for the next 60 years. But what we haven't really talked about is what about when they're riding with other people, when they're passengers? And statistics tell us that 50% of the young people who are seriously injured or killed in cars are passengers. And so we want to talk about who teens are driving with. If they're not driving their own cars, who are they driving with? And how can they change potentially dangerous situations into safer ones? So today I have with me Candace Lightner is the founder of MAD and the CEO of We Save Lives. You just had a big week for passenger safety, and you've done so much to help people understand the issues and how teens can stay safe.
We Save Lives, the organization that I founded, launched a campaign a year or two ago called the Courage to Intervene Promise. And it is where young people or older people or families could sign a promise saying, I will intervene if someone's going to drive drunk or drugged. I will intervene if somebody's going to drive distracted. And it's sort of a takeoff on the old Friends Don't Let Friends Drive Drunk campaign that was launched, many years ago. And what was interesting is I would talk about this promise in wherever I was speaking, and I speak mainly or a lot of times at universities, not so much at high schools anymore, but universities and colleges and whatever. And I was so surprised when I would talk about it, how many students would tell me that they have ridden with someone who was drunk, drugged, or distracted and didn't know quite how to handle the situation. So that made me start thinking that we need to focus more on passengers. We don't want to take the onus off drivers, but we did want to say, hey, passengers, you can do something about your own safety.
They totally have control of the vehicle. And that's the thing. They've got the brake pedal, they've got the accelerator, they've got the steering wheel. The passenger has very little control and really no control over the vehicle.
But they do have control over themselves. And I think a lot of passengers have forgotten that, because every time I read of a horrendous crash involving drunk, drugged, and or distracted, because those are the 3 focuses of We Save Lives, I read in the majority of cases that a passenger was in the car. Why, A, did they get in the car? Or B, why didn't they speak up or say something? In the case of drunk and drugged driving, there are times when you don't know until you get in the car with a driver. And we have some videos that are going up on our website that demonstrate that. You don't know until you get in the car that that person may be in fact intoxicated or impaired. And then, of course, you're in the car and they've started driving and you realize it and you need to take action then. But in a lot of cases, because you've come out of the bar together, you've left the party together, or whatever, that they're too intoxicated to drive or too impaired to drive. And the most important thing you should do is not get in the car. I think a lot of times teens get in the car, even though they know they shouldn't, because they honestly believe they can impact the driver's driving. So we encourage parents, and we have done this for years, to offer to their children, as soon as they start getting licenses, they start driving, they start going with people, the opportunity to call me, no questions asked, I'll come get you no matter where you are. And that's the first thing. The second thing is to take a taxi or call a friend, or if you're sober, offer to be the designated driver. And, you may be right about the teens that, and I know when the students raised their hands, their response was, I didn't know how to handle the situation. I didn't know what to say. And I didn't want to alienate this person. I think that's why I really wanted to do this 1 week of really empowering passengers to love themselves enough and to care about their own safety enough to speak up. I don't think maybe a lot of teens don't realize they all know about drunk driving thanks to what we did 40 years ago, but they don't know, I think a lot of times still don't realize that distracted driving is dangerous. Number one, we've had a hell of a time getting laws passed on the issue. Number two, legislators do it. Everybody does it. Their parents do it. And so I'm not sure they realize this really is dangerous behavior.
Oh, I think some of them do. I've been in cars with like an Uber driver who is using their cell phone. And it's not easy to speak up, even as an adult, even as a driver. It's not easy. I love myself. And I've said, would you please not use that while I'm in the car? But it it takes some courage to do that. For young people, when it's your buddy driving, it's tough. But there are some phrases that they can use that can change the situation without being confrontational. They don't want to be confrontational. And like, I have to pee. Okay. So I have to pee. You pull the car over. Now you decide whether you're going to get back in it or not. Let's get food. Another one changes the gate, assuming that they didn't know when they got in the car. If they got in the car with someone, and we talked to a young man last week from Vancouver who is paraplegic. He actually, his friend who was the passenger in the vehicle died in a crash, and his friends, the other friends, took a cab and they didn't get into the cab. And he will regret that for the rest of his life. So, making those better choices to begin with is one thing, but then changing the situation if you're in the car. And that backup plan that you talked about is really important. Somebody who will come and pick you up without yelling at you and make sure you get home and everybody else gets home safely.
Well, and by the way, I think it's important that you brought up the fact that you had a hard time, or I don't know, was uncomfortable speaking to a blank driver. I don't have a hard time at all. And that's because of my life experiences. I have a broken back as a result of a distracted driver. So for life, I've got a broken back. So I don't have any problem speaking up. But I think one of the things you can do both as an adult and as a teen, and by the way, I do deal with this with adults, where I've not long ago, I had to tell somebody who wanted to do a GPS on her little cell phone. And I was the passenger, and I said, I'm sorry, that's not acceptable with me in the car. I'll give you the directions. But one of the things you can do as a teen or as an adult, which may prevent any kind of confrontation, is before you ride with a driver, and we're going to talk later about what parents should do in terms of their teen riding with somebody. But before you ride with a driver, and I do this, is just say, hey, Mary, thank you so much for giving me a ride to school. I just have two rules I want to let you know about. They're both for your safety and mine. One is always wear a seatbelt, and I'm sure you do because I know you care. And the second one, because I'll wear a seatbelt too. And the second one is not to drive with your cell phone or Bluetooth. And I know, Mary, that you know that's dangerous because we hear about it in school. We know kids who have been impacted by this or whatever. And so Mary knows that up front. And I've actually been told by people who have done that. I mean, I do it all the time, but who have done this, that they've never had anybody say, well, you can't get in my car. I think most of the time Mary's going to go, hey, I really respect, she may not say it, but think I really respect you for your beliefs and standing up for them, and also for caring about my safety as much as yours. I think if you do it with love and purpose, my two favorite words, that most people will accept that and agree with it. And you probably won't have a problem going forward. And we're only talking now about distracted driving because it's a different case with impaired driving.
I agree, but I know it's also tough for teens. I think one of the points that you made that's a really good one is, if we need to text, like I can text for you, or if I'll give you the directions from the GPS, but that kind of assisting the driver. I'm not sure when teens have a hard time putting down rules, but just saying, I'll be happy to do that because then you don't have to hold your phone.
Wait a minute. I'm sorry. I disagree with you on teens have a hard time putting down rules. I think it comes back to A, not caring enough about their own safety. Two, what you said, maybe alienating the person. But three, in the case of distracted driving, I really do believe this. They just don't realize how dangerous it is because everybody does it. And I mean, I had to deal with that with drunk driving 40 some odd years ago. And to me, changing the social norms on distracted driving are no different than changing the norms on drunk driving. I mean, that's just it's really basically the same. Everybody drank and drove, socially acceptable. When my daughter was killed, I remember my neighbor came up to me, and when we found out it was a drunk driver because it was a hit and run, and said to me, "Oh my God, that could have been me that killed your child." And I thought, whoa, do we need to change that attitude? So you start thinking, hey, it could have been my child that died from a drunk driver. Well, we have the same issue with distracted driving. A lot of people, including adults, really don't believe it's dangerous.
I totally agree with you. The other thing is that when it comes to young people and especially cell phones, especially texting, that kind of thing, they'll come right out and say, but that's true for you, but I'm a really good texter. And, and it's true. They are better texters, but you still have to take your eyes off the road to text. You still have to take a hand off the wheel to text. And they're not great drivers. It takes a lot of time to get experience driving. So which is not to say that anybody should be texting. I'm not saying that at all. I won't even use the Bluetooth in my car. So I because that's a cognitive distraction too. So I do agree with you. I just think that in some terms that we need to put them in terms that teens feel comfortable speaking up, because you're right, there are some teens who are very in charge and have no problem stepping up and saying, like, this is who I am and I need to look after me. And that's true, but a lot of them aren't like that. And so I think we need to come up with kind of ways that will fit everyone, because the rules really do apply to everybody.
Well, I was thinking as you were talking about this and talking about texting, especially, but I wonder if a teen could say to somebody who's getting ready to text something like, if I were driving and I closed my eyes for, and I can't remember the length of time it is, but whatever the football field, but I closed my eyes for 60 seconds, let's just say, which is texting is about that. I guess I honestly don't know, or close my eyes for 20 or 30 seconds. Yeah, would you, let's say 20 seconds. If I were to close my eyes for 20 seconds, would you feel safe? And if the driver thinks about it, chances are they aren't. And there's nothing wrong with saying to the driver, I don't feel safe when you do that. I want to feel safe. And I know you want me to be safe, and I don't feel safe for you. I think as long as you also put the emphasis back on their safety and their life and how much you care and love them, I think that can also make a difference. I want you to be safe because, hey, we're supposed to go see the such and such conference or whatever it is they do next week, event or rock concert or whatever next week, or we're going to the movies or whatever. And I want you to go with me. And so, can you just make me feel safe? And you can make me feel safe by just not doing this while you're driving. Let's just wait until we get to the destination, or I'll text and I'll do this with you.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do it for you. I think along that line, though, I think parents need to understand that, like, 'cause I've heard parents say, like, if I text my daughter, I expect a response within, 5 minutes. Well, if they're driving, you don't want a response within 5 minutes. You want to make sure that they get to a safe place before they respond.
So just add do not drive mode onto your phone. That's the easiest way to solve this problem. I mean, we're the ones who petitioned Apple to add the do not drive mode onto the iPhones. They had airplane mode. So we said, why don't you do not drive mode, which they did.
Candace is referring to do not disturb while driving mode, which you can enable on an iPhone. Similar applications or modes are available on other devices.
So if every teen who drives would just add do not drive mode on their cell phone, that takes care of the problem. So you set it so it comes on automatically when you drive. And so every time you get in the car and drive, It lets the people know who are calling you. And sorry, I'm driving. You can't reach me, but they can still leave a message or whatever. And I think there's a way if it's urgent or an emergency, you can bypass it. If I'm riding in the car with somebody as a passenger and I go to text someone, it'll actually pop up because I have it automatic and it'll say, "You're driving. You can't do this." And then it gives me the option of saying, "No, I'm not driving," at which I can do. So that actually can solve a major problem right there if everybody would just add whatever their mobile device is, find a do not drive mode, because then it doesn't become a problem.
But it also gets rid of the temptation. I mean, even people who don't, want to be answering when that phone dings or buzzes, it's very hard to ignore it. So if you don't get that and there's an automatic response, I mean, it kind of gets rid of that sort of Pavlovian, response too.
I have friends, and by the way, I don't have a car and I rarely drive. And so I'll get in their car and then their Bluetooth thing will ring. And I'm like, how do I do? I go, "Are you kidding me? You have this on while I'm in the car?" And they said, "Yeah, but I'm not going to answer it." And I go, "Yeah, but it's going to bother you. Will bother you. So do me a favor and turn it off," which they do. I mean, I've never had anybody say no to me, but they also know who I am. So it
Right.
might be
They
different.
of
Still,
course. Now
yeah.
that app that you're talking about, do you see it come up as a recent text, or did you leave a message, or
You get to your destination and you go to look at your texts or messages, they pop up.
okay, okay. So maybe we'll put a link to a couple of those in the information that we're providing with this podcast. So parents who want to can encourage their teens to download that. What do you think about family agreements that spell out whether, what the rules are about texting, about alcohol, about cannabis impaired driving?
Well, like I said before, we have the Courage to Intervene promise, and that is an agreement that everybody signs, but that's more from the passenger's perspective. I think family agreements are fine, but and I'm sure you're aware that our statistics are going up and not down, and they expect the trend to continue. And for years, we've put the onus completely on the driver. Do not, do not, do not do this. Do not do that. Sign this agreement. Sign this pledge. Every nonprofit has a pledge as a driver. I will not. I don't know that those are very effective. The do not. I would rather see, I love the Courage to Intervene promise, but I would rather see something that says do. You know, do call me if you're ever in need or you ever think you're in an unsafe situation, frankly, no matter what it is. But, do call me, do let me know. I would rather see more positive messaging than all this, you agree not to do this and you agree not to do that, because we've been doing that for years and the numbers are going up.
Okay. And I do agree that in many cases positive reinforcement does a whole lot more than it's kind of the stick and the carrot. And that people respond better to reasons to do the right thing than with the don't do that.
It's interesting because many years ago when I started MAD, we had a contract. We had something called, I don't remember what it was called, but it was a contract that parents and teens signed that said, "I will come pick you up." The parents agreed. It wasn't a do not, it was an "I will agree that if you're ever in any kind of a dangerous situation, I will come pick you up." What was ironic about it, and we would introduce it at high schools and whatever, is the criticism and the flack that we got over actually doing something like this, because everybody thought we were giving permission for kids to get drunk or whatever. And we came back saying, "You don't need to give kids permission. They're going to do it anyway." And what we're trying to do is prevent a tragedy. Interestingly enough, over the years, it's amazing to me how many parents have come up to me and said, "I remember back when, and I want you to know that my kids did this. We did this with my kids, and they always called me." And it was just a given that they would always call me, and how successful apparently that contract was. So anything that says, I will come, no questions asked, or, whatever, I think is just absolutely terrific. As long as it's a kind of a positive message.
And for young people who don't have parents that can come pick them up, maybe they don't drive, other people who will agree to provide them with a ride.
I think that's a great idea. Also, there's nothing wrong with carrying a little extra money in case you have to take a taxi. Always have on hand, especially if you know you're going out partying or whatever you do, is to have some extra cash on hand. Find out, what the taxi fare is. Find out who the taxi company is, that takes you around or whatever, and and have their number on hand.
Another thing that I was talking about is now this is we've talked so far we've talked about don't get in the car, and that's the best thing, right? Call for that backup plan, find another way home that's safe. And how to kind of change the situation if you are in the car, and ways to speak up without perhaps being confrontational, but changing the situation so you can get out. Another great one there is I'm going to barf. Nobody wants someone to barf in their car. And yeah, so I mean, yeah, they'll pull over pretty fast if you're going to barf. And then you call for that backup ride, whatever. So that kind of thing. But there are other ways that passengers can actually help. And one of the things that we've seen, and you were talking about some of the things that we're seeing on roads now that are actually rising. And one of them here is excessive speed. Speeding is really rising here too. And so, one of the ways to change something like that is why do people speed? Well, often because they're running late. So, how can a passenger impact someone who's running late? Well, help them plan better. I looked it up on Google Maps, and it's going to take us about 35 minutes to get there. But if we hit every red light, that's going to cost us another 5 minutes. And then you know that when we pick up Candace, she's never ready. So we'll let her know ahead of time that if she's not ready in 5 minutes, we're leaving. I mean, but kind of putting all of that so you have, and we want to get there in time to park and get our popcorn and get in our seats before the movie starts. So we really can't leave at 6 o'clock. We have to leave at 5:20. That kind of pre-planning so that we're not rushed, and passengers can help with that.
Yeah, no, I think that's very important. The other thing is, and I read this somewhere, and they said something about when you speed, you might be a few minutes earlier. It was a few minutes. And so there's nothing wrong with saying to somebody who hasn't pre planned enough, we might save about 2 or 3 minutes from these actions, but then we also, I mean, this is me though, but we also might end up dead. And so is it worth dying, for 2 or 3 minutes? I mean, you have to kind of realize what your priorities are. And I think the other thing, and it's really interesting. I didn't know if this had happened in Canada too, but I know in this country during the pandemic, the numbers went up that we expected to go down. And the two main reasons were from speeding and from distracted driving. And the other thing is to emphasize, look, all right, so we're going to be 5 or 10 minutes late. That's fine. It's not a big deal. It's okay. I'm not upset about it. You're not upset. Let's just make sure that we get there safely.
Making sure that you get there. And so that's another thing for parents, that you have a strict curfew that everybody has to be home by 11 p.m. Well, you don't want them running red lights to get home at 11. Yeah, maybe help them plan, well, that means you have to leave Joe's no later than 10:30. Okay. But in the event that they are running a little late, you don't want to be holding them so hard to that deadline. If they're not back by 11, you're going to ground them for 2 weeks, because that pushes them to make those risky choices again.
Yeah, but I think the other option here, and I agree with you, is that if you're a passenger with a cell phone, there's nothing wrong with calling the parents and saying, hey, look, we got a late start or whatever, but we are on our way and we should be there in 30 minutes. We might be a few minutes late. As a parent, I know how important it was. I remember after my daughter was killed, it was kind of interesting in a way because my kids called me when they got to their destination. They called me when they left their destination. I had asked them to do it. They did actually, which made a big difference with me and how I felt. And so There's nothing wrong with parents saying, and look, if you can't make it on time, just give us a call. Let us know where you are, where you're, that you're leaving the event or the so and so's house or whatever, and when you anticipate coming home. And I find it hard to believe, and unfortunately, really hard to believe, that in today's world, most people don't know someone who was killed in some kind of crash. And so I think it's completely understandable for parents to want their children to reassure them of their safety. And I think most children and teens or whatever should understand that, because they would want the same from their parents. If their parents said, look, we're going out to dinner for the evening, guys, we'll be home around 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock comes, 12 o'clock comes, would you not want to hear from your parents and they're safe and that they're on their way or they're stuck here or whatever? Well, it's a quid pro quo. You do for one what you do for the other.
Yeah. But at the same time, parents can't be that hard line. You're going to get you're not back here by 11. You have to there has to be some give and take. And I agree with you that the best thing would be for the passenger, even the driver, to text before they get in the car saying, "Hey, I'm leaving now. Should be home in 40 minutes." One of the reasons I think that this continues to be an issue is that we often refer to these as accidents. Somebody was killed in an accident. Well, when it's an accident, nobody's really at fault. It's just karma. It was really sad, but it was an accident. And almost 100% of the time, if somebody had made a better choice, that would never have happened. And so most people in road safety now automatically say crash or collision rather than accident. And I think reframing it so it's not just karma is really important too.
We actually launched the campaign Drop the A Word about 4 years ago and formed a coalition and went after AP style book, and we were successful in getting them to redefine for the media the word accident. There's absolutely nothing wrong in the case of drunken impaired driving to call it a crime, because it is. And it's interesting, we call knifing and all kinds of other things a crime, and yet drunk driving, which is a crime and a violent crime, um, when somebody is killed or injured, we don't. And so, yes, we support crash, and we initiated this, like I said, some years ago, crash, collision, wreck. But in the case of impaired driving, I call it a crime because that's it. My daughter was killed by a crime, in a crime. And so, absolutely. And accident, the word accident enables people to continue driving unsafe.
Yeah. And the other thing that is an issue in road safety is there's one death here and one death there and a severe injury here. It's not like a plane crash where 350 people die at once. So somehow that kind of enables us to not realize how prevalent this really is and how many, I mean, as you say, like pretty much everybody knows somebody who was either severely injured or killed in a crash.
I think, to be honest with you, I think in the last 40 years, there is, because of so many advocates and activists and groups that have popped up, far more awareness about highway safety. And I personally don't like the term highway safety because it's so impersonal. What we're talking about is people safety, human being safety, whatever. I haven't come up yet with another term, but I'd like to, because people think road safety, what's that? It's so unsexy.
You are the only other person I've ever heard say that. I say that all the time. It's so unsexy.
And safer. I mean, I've tried to use terms like safer on our roads, safer while traveling. There's got to be another term that we come up with. But I do believe that we're far more, and especially because of what I did 40 some odd years ago. I know that's true because I've seen the statistics drop. So people are far more aware of your safety while you're in the motor vehicle. So I think, and that's a good thing. But I think what the problem is that I'm not so sure, to be honest with you. This is a conversation I really haven't had publicly yet, that we're giving the right message and that we're saying the right things that get people interested, number one. Number two, that make them realize they can do something about this. And number three, I know in the case of drunk driving, impaired driving, not drugged, that's another conversation. People think that problem was solved and it isn't because the numbers are going up. So you've got three things. People think, they solved the drunk driving problem years ago. And, be this, what does this mean? And what can I do about it? We're not giving clear directions. It's one of the thing in Passenger Safety Week that I really emphasize. We can't just tell people there's a problem here, passengers aren't speaking up. We have to give them the tools and tell them how they can say it, what to do, etc. And that's something I also see lacking in the highway safety movement. We identify problems. Oh my God, this is such a problem. But I'm not sure we're giving people the right tools that allow them to participate in solving the problem outside of the sign this pledge that says you won't do this. Really. We do not encourage people, we encourage them to ask for the keys, but we don't encourage them to try forcefully to take the keys. And the reason is we've had several deaths when that's happened. So our thing is if you cannot get them to give you the keys peacefully and they insist on getting in the car, that's fine. You don't get in the car. And what you should do, and it's interesting when I say this in groups, the response, but what I would do, my recommendation would be that you tell them up front, I am going to call the police. I am going to give them your license number and the make of your car, and I am going to tell them what direction you're going in. I'm doing this out of love for you because I don't want you to kill yourself and I don't want you to kill someone else. And I wouldn't have an issue doing that. And I don't know, some people told me they couldn't do that or wouldn't. That's fine. But to me, it's life saving. So that's what I would do. But that's the enough. And sometimes that'll be enough where they'll say, okay, I'm not driving then. All right, I won't drive. But don't ever try and force them to give you the keys. And don't ever try to physically force them out of the car because you can endanger yourself. Just make sure you get out and then take whatever action you think you need to take from that point on.
Yeah, and as we said at the top of this, 50% of the people who are severely injured or die in crashes are passengers.
Yeah, because we had 62% out of in our country.
62?
Well, 62% of total crashes involve passengers, of total fatalities involve passengers.
Wow. Isn't that just outrageous? And people along for a ride that never get to their destination.
So I think what we should talk about too is what happens if the passenger is drunk also. So you've got the driver who's drunk and you've got the passenger who's drunk. And sometimes they're not always clear in terms of decision making.
Oh, they're never clear in terms of if they're both impaired, that's
Right. So I think this is where, when you were talking about pre planning, that pre planning is probably the best way to prevent this from happening. And that is, you both know you're going out drinking 9 times out of 10 before you go. So make the arrangements ahead of time. Don't wait until you're too drunk to be rational, too drunk to drive yourself as a designated driver, but make those arrangements ahead of time. Let like your credit card, whatever, find a designated driver to go with you, whatever, but make the arrangements ahead of time before you get to that situation. And it's amazing because we have stories on our website, really sad, tragic stories where passengers were sober that got in the car and were killed. And the parents have said to me, God, I'll never understand why he did that. Why, knowing he was sober, went ahead and got in the car with somebody who was drunk. This is where I honestly believe the whole concept of I think I can make you drive safer comes in, because I'm sober. So, I can tell you which way to turn, or, if you're going off the road or whatever. And I'm saying that doesn't work. So, if you're both going to be drinking, then just make those arrangements ahead of time.
but if both drivers are sober, then I think that help from the passenger is a really good thing. I'll tell you where to turn. And when you do that, and I'm thinking here, we have a highway called the 401, and it's 16 lanes in some places. eight in each direction. So it is a big highway and high speed driving, of course. And not uncommon, you'll see someone from the outside lane. Oh my God, this is my exit, right across all the lanes. So I think that the passenger can really help there too. Okay, our exit is coming up next. We need to be getting over into the other lane, that kind of coaching, but not this is our exit. I think that passengers can not only protect themselves, which they need to do, and make good choices, but they can also be a real benefit to the driver if they have that mindset when they get in the vehicle. Hey, I can text for us. I can watch the GPS. I can, be a second set of eyes on the road. That kind of thing.
There's one other thing, well, actually, several other things, but one other thing I want to mention. In this country, and I think the majority of our states, if not in all, we have something called the graduated driver's licensing laws. I don't know if you have. Okay. So that's the other thing, and this is, I have a thing about parents. Parents should know whether or not whomever is driving their teen, whether or not they follow the GDL laws. And in most cases, you can only have one passenger or no passenger. On our website, as you saw, there was a blog about a young girl who was killed in a car with seven teenagers, with a teenager driving, and she was the only one killed. And that girl had no business. The driver had no business having seven teenagers in the car. And then the parents had no business allowing her to have seven kids in the car. So the other thing is what parents can do. We have a checklist on the website that parents can download on the We Save Lives website, on the passenger safety, or www.nationalpassengersafety.org website, a checklist that parents can download that they can ask both their teen and the driver of the car, that I think is very preventative. Do you have a driver's license? Do you wear a seatbelt? Are you taking any medication that might interfere with your driving? Or as their, teen, do you know if they do this? Do you know where you're going? And if you change destinations, are you willing to let us know? And we don't know this, kids, so we'd like to meet them. So they need to come in before they do. We also want their parents' contact number and phone number, just in case. I mean, there's a whole series of questions of action that parents can take to also help prevent tragedies from happening. And how many parents, and I really do wonder, know whom their kid is riding with?
Oh, I would bet that a lot, somebody, the horn honks and off the teen
Yeah,
goes.
well,
Uh,
find out, because it could be life saving, and there's nothing wrong with showing your teens love by asking these questions. To me, that's just showing them how much you love them and care about them, and you care about their safety. So I would really encourage parents to download this list of questions. I mean, Melinda says to me, she's a really good friend of mine whose daughter is the one I was referencing. She says to me all the time, if only I had known. And we're trying to keep parents from having to say, if only. I had known they were going to have 10 kids in the car. If only I had known this kid didn't have a driver's license. If only I had known this kid has been cited 3 times before, or was driving on a suspended license, or whatever. And you can prevent the if onlys by just being as preventative as possible.
that brings up another point, and that is like talking about driving with your teens. And not, one time to go through the checklist with every person they go out with. That's important too. But talking about it regularly. When they leave the house, drive safely. Every time that they're coming and going, knowing kind of, yeah, without being invasive. You don't need to know exactly where you're going, but I do need to know. Like I don't need to know at so and so's party, but I do need to know whereabouts you're going to go and what time you're going to be home. I remember reading some time ago somewhere, and I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was like some kind of a code that a teen had when if they perhaps got to a party where they were really uncomfortable and didn't want to stay, but didn't want to look wimpy and say, hey, I don't want to stay here. And they would text a word, and it's something, maybe elephant, something something. And then the parent calls and says, hey, we've got a family emergency here. I need you to come home right away. And the parent goes and picks them up. And they can kind of save face to the friends, but they're home safe. Because that can happen too. You don't know what you're getting into.
Yeah. No, I think that's great too. The other thing is, in talking about parents, is that we need to, parents need to set a good example. I mean, I see, and unfortunately, and this sounds sexist, but I do see it more from women than I do from men. I see women in their car with their cell phones to their ear and children in the car. I mean, it's like, starting from young age, your kids watch how you drive. My grandchildren, my daughter in law years ago, when cell phones were, really becoming popular and stuff, and she would drive and use her cell phone, and my grandkids, they're so cool, would say, Mom, Data says that's dangerous, so you can't do that with us in the car. They had no problem speaking out, but maybe that's because they're my grandkids, I don't know. And she stopped doing it. So, kids, hey, if your parents are doing something like this, I don't care if you're 7 years old, be sure and let them know that you feel unsafe. But this is something that parents do, is that they will drive using their cell phones. And we actually had some horrible stories of parents who drive drunk with their kids in the car. And what kind of an example are you showing outside of the fact that it's incredibly stupid and dangerous? What are you showing your children? A, that you don't care about them and their safety, really, and B, that it's okay to do this behavior, and it's not okay. And if you really care about your kids and their safety, you won't use a cell phone and you won't drive impaired.
The other thing along that line is, if parents have been using their cell phones, and a lot do, and they're listening to this now and deciding that, hey, I better set a better example, because for sure you're setting the high bar for your teen. They're going to drive the way you do as the high bar, but with a whole lot less experience. So if you're doing it, they're going to do it. So if you've been doing it up until now and you think, hey, I got to be a better role model, it's important to have that conversation. I have been doing that. I realize now that I have to be a better role model for you. So beginning today, that's it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's important that they do have that discussion with them. Yeah, that they stop, but they also explain to them, I've realized, how dangerous it is. And that's true of anything, by the way. And I think in turn, maybe teens who use their cell phone a lot and then maybe realize after this airs that that's dangerous. I think it's just as important for them, A, to let their parents know, and B, let their friends know. Hey, look, I realize that I've been doing this and, you've been very patient or you've spoken up or whatever, and I haven't listened. Well, I'm going to listen now and I'm not going to do this anymore. I've already downloaded do not drive mode. I've turned off my Bluetooth when I get in the car. I want you to feel safe with me. And to say the same thing to their parents. I want you, hey, mom and dad, I've been doing this and I realize I shouldn't, unless they're, afraid of whatever. But to definitely let their friends know, hey, I'm no longer going to do this. Or, hey, guys, I'm no longer going to put you at risk if I'm drunk, if I'm too drunk to drive. We're
You
going to
know,
start
that
plans ahead of
That's
time.
one interesting about the whole, "Don't drink and drive" campaigns from years ago. At one time, I mean, I can tell you, I've had a couple of drinks and got behind the wheel. Nobody was talking about it, and then people started talking about it and how dangerous it was, and culture changed. It's like smoking, everybody smoked. Now nobody smokes because culture changed, and that's really what needs to happen here. We need to change culture. And that means bringing together like minded people that make sure everybody's on the same page. And if they're not on the same page, then you have to make some serious decisions about who that young person is allowed to get in the car with.
Yeah, we have a saying, one courageous voice can change one deadly choice. And I think people should just imprint that on their foreheads or write it on their palms or put it on their cell phones that shows up every single day on their calendar. But, and it is the courage to intervene and it is the courage to speak up. But at the same time, you just have to realize it. You just have to. But I would hope that young people would realize that their lives are so important, and so valued and so loved, that it may be worth a friendship. But then you don't want that person to be your friend when you talk about like minded people. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is. I mean, it's like, and I'm sure there are other examples you can use, but listen, if you knew a kid was coming to school with a gun, would you not notify your teachers? And that's dangerous. Well, guess what? So is driving distracted or drunk. You're just substituting a gun for a 2-ton weapon. That's equally, and in some cases, more dangerous. So you just have to think, God, would I allow somebody, or to come to school? No, I wouldn't. So why would I let somebody, drive distracted or impaired?
One of the frustrations is, and I've said that before, is that if you do something that has an impact, makes a change, and a crash is averted, you never know. It's not unless you make the bad decision and something horrible happens that you get the feedback. And so maybe in changing culture around this issue, we need to start thanking people too for thank you for not letting me drive last night.
Not only that, I actually have done this where I've seen people pulled over and they're texting or making phone calls. I've walked up to them and I've said, "Thank you so much for not doing this while you're driving and for pulling off the road." I don't even know them and I keep walking. There's nothing wrong with thanking your friend who does not text and drive, but drives you or whatever, and saying, "I just want to thank you so much for caring enough about me and as your passenger and yourself to not do anything to endanger us." The other thing is, if you know somebody who drives impaired a lot or drives distracted a lot, and you've made the choice and the decision not to get in their car anymore because you just can't change their behavior, I would hope you would make that decision. The more people and the more friends this person has that do make that decision, we're just not riding with Mary anymore because she just can't get off that cell phone. The more influence you'll have over Mary, because eventually she'll be, oh God, nobody wants to go with me. I wonder why. And maybe we'll change her behavior. And the same with somebody who's drunk. Oh, geez, says Pete, who's always driving drunk, from some party or another. Nobody wants to go with me anymore. So maybe there's a message here.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's important to kind of notice what's happening and to make the changes where you can.
I think the most important things we covered: be a good example to your kids, make sure you know whom they're riding with. Passengers, speak up because you can actually influence the outcome of a dangerous situation. You can make a difference, not only for yourself, but for the driver. But always remember your safety comes first. And if you don't feel safe getting in the car, don't get in the car. If you don't feel safe staying in the car, find a way to get out of the car and find another way home. Um, make sure you have backup plans, as you have mentioned. You have a credit card to call the taxi company. You've got parents who will come pick you, or a friend pick you up, a friend that will also come get you. Make sure your messaging is with love and purpose. It doesn't have to be obnoxious or outlandish, but it can be said with, hey, I care about you. I care about me. I honestly believe the more you speak up, the more you will be respected by your friends because it shows you're secure within yourself and that you know what's best for you. And let's face it, is there anyone here that listens or is out there that doesn't think safety is best for themselves and that doesn't do things probably every day that are safe because they know it's safe? They're always making choices, and in many cases, it's the safer choice. Well, you just have to do the same thing when you're driving or with somebody that's driving. Make the safest choice, and to go to our website, and you can download the Courage to Intervene Promise and the list of questions. And if the videos are up, these were done by teens that give examples of things you can say in different scenarios. And so you can download those or look at those, and they'll give you some ideas of messages that you can deliver when you're in an unsafe situation.
And talk to your neighbors, make sure everybody's on the same page, and talk to your kids regularly. Not one good conversation about the driving safety, although we do need another name for that, but um, ongoing conversations about making good choices behind the wheel to make sure everybody gets home safely every time they go out. Thanks very much, Candace Lightner.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Before You Hand Over the Keys was brought to you by Teens Learn to Drive. Check out our website at teenslearntodrive.com for more information, videos, and resources.